So who's going to identify as Maria?
I can, Kevin. I don't care.
Okay,
Thank you, Corey.
you're welcome.
So I think we have a fairly short but important agenda tonight. I don't know, Larry, if you want to start off or you just want me to dig in. You're muted.
You'd think I'd remember this after a while. No, you got it. Go ahead, Meg.
So the biggest thing on our agenda tonight is to take a look at the project scope. I had emailed you all last night, the overview, like sort of the aerial photo of the parking lot and the roofs with the notations that BCA put on there as far as what the project includes. And then I also sent another spreadsheet, which I'm going to try and share with you now, that looked at the different, I can't share it, so I hope you can all reference it, but it looked at the different, Corey, are you able to make it so that I can share my screen? Not sure she can hear me.
Corey, I think if you make her a co-host, then she can share. I think that gets her that option.
Corey, do you hear us?
Yes, I hear you. What was
Are
I
you
supposed to do?
Are you able to make me a co-host so I can share my screen?
Yes. Okay, you should be able to do that.
Does anybody see my screen?
No.
No.
Okay, I think I'm getting there. How about now?
Yes.
There you are.
Okay. Christine, do you want to kind of walk us through this? Do you mind? All right, I'll start. And then I guess she's having a little audio trouble. Basically, if you look at the top part with the green, it shows the 4 project scope options. The top one is if we did everything that we've talked about, the high school, middle school work, the Townsend flood mitigation, and the energy performance contract, what that project cost would be, and that's the 8.2 million. And then as you go down, the next option is the high school, middle school, and energy performance, but not Townsend. The third option is high school, middle school, and Townsend, but not the energy performance. And then the fourth option is high school, middle school only at 4.7 million. Is everybody with me so far?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. And then column A shows basically what the average local share after, what the average annual local share would be, or the district's cost after state aid each year for those various projects. Column B then shows how much of that is covered by debt service that's expiring anyway. And column C shows the net impact on our budget on a given year. Christine, can you nod if you're with me so far? Am I? Okay. So basically what this shows is if we were to do everything and not take into account the energy savings, that project would have a $66,000 annual impact on our budget. But Train in their estimate said that they think our energy savings could be around $70,000 a year. So the net impact of that project is basically a $4,000 positive cash flow if we were to do everything. I think I hear you now, Christine.
What's that?
I think I hear you now.
Can you
The
hear me?
bottom, yes. The
Okay,
bottom,
you can, awesome.
the bottom part just shows the impact if we were to apply some of the funds that or all of the funds that we put in the capital reserve to the project. And if we did that, every year it shows a positive cash flow to the district. So really what needs to be decided by the committee is what scope they want to include in the project. If we do the energy performance work outside of an energy performance contract, we're taking all of the risk that that $70,000 in savings would actually be achieved. And if for some reason it wasn't, the cost to the district would be greater.
Meg, is that a one-time use of 500,000 out of the capital reserve on the bottom?
Yes,
So in year one, that would be that use.
yes. It's basically, we'd put it towards the cost of the project upfront while the project was happening, and we wouldn't borrow that money.
Okay, thank you. Also, nothing is grant related in Townsend. That's if we did the whole thing, paid for the whole thing, correct?
Correct. I believe that's not considering any contribution from CWC, correct, Christine?
That is correct, yes.
I think we're looking, we have to, unfortunately, I think we have to hold firm with the flood mitigation grant, in my mind, as a debt we really can't incur. So I think we'd be looking at lines 2 down on both scenarios.
So if we were to not consider Townsend, we would basically be considering the second option with the high school, middle school, and the energy performance contract, or the bottom option of just the high school, middle school.
That's my opinion.
The only, I think where you're going is to have the little extra safety at the end of the day. I see that too. I'm just wondering, if we do all the work, we're still looking at no tax levy increase to the taxpayers, correct? Am I following that correct?
Yes, that would be true, provided we achieved all of the energy savings. I guess the question that we have to ask ourselves is, if we're going to spend this money and we're going to spend if we're going to spend the taxpayers or the school district's money to do a capital project, and it's district money, not CWC money, is Townsend flood mitigation what our priority would be?
I think we all agreed right up front that the high school, middle school was our immediate concern. And if we got the EPC in it, that's just better. You got to remember, right now, we need to get to sustainable, and throwing $800 and some $1,000 into a capital project that could be outside funded is going to push us further away from being sustainable in the future. Because we're not really, it's not that we are generating a cash flow. What we're doing is we're pushing out more of a debt load and not allowing the debt load to continue in some areas. So basically what I'm saying is you're not contracting anything. And our high priorities were high school, middle school, roofs, parking lots, that type of work. And we're going to have the flood mitigation process be a CWC grant. I think even at the end of the day, if it comes back and says that the state education department is not going to support that as a local in-kind share, then our next approach was to go back to CWC for the whole entire fund and say, we tried, but we can't go that route. I just don't see how we can put another $1 million in my mind, that's going to pull us out of that good budget cycle if we have one going, because we have hard times coming. And I don't think right now that's our main priority. It's the high school, middle school roofs, and to keep everything together with the parking lots.
Graydon, I don't disagree with anything you said at all. I have a question for Christine. If we go to the gray, the second grid down below, and if we take the second line, which is high school, middle school, and EPC, that's $7 million and change. And we're paying for that as we go through the capital reserve.
Yeah.
So we're not incurring any debt. But given that we have a savings of roughly $69,000, all things being equal, you could conceivably take that money and replace it back into a capital reserve.
Exactly correct. As long as you have established a capital reserve that has the ceiling that you to take the deposit, then yes, you can. And actually, that's a very good point, Larry. So with that position, that would create revenues greater than expenses for the district. And some districts don't take that into account and will plug operating with that 69,000. And then when that 69,000 is gone, then there's a hole in operating. So it would be our recommendation to make sure that either it is put into reserves, or if it's utilized in operating, make sure that you wean yourself off it once that time comes that revenue will no longer be there.
I also, I had a question on the capital reserve and jumpstarting our small capital projects of 100,000. Do we have enough to be able to do that and still use 500 of capital figuring into this equation?
Yeah, the $100,000 first $100,000 capital project currently is all coming out of next year's operating budget, with none of it coming out of the capital reserve. So the complete 500,000 would be there.
Okay.
I want to jump back to Larry's question for just a second to clarify on that second option, the $7,077,000. The district would take out debt for $6,577,000, and we'd put $500,000 cash into the project from the capital reserve. And then it would theoretically generate this $69,000 positive cash flow to the district.
Is that considering the energy performance contract as part of the capital project?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's really what's generating the savings, John, is that we're assuming there'd be about $70,000 a year in energy savings, and that $70,000 is what's your positive cash flow.
Okay, and we feel we want to go with the energy performance contract as part of that without having an energy company there guaranteeing our results.
That's the decision that we have to make. I mean, I think, number one, I think the energy performance measures, Scott, I'd love your opinion on this after, chime in and let me know your thoughts, but I think the energy performance measures that have been identified are fairly low hanging fruit. I don't think, I think there's a good chance that the savings they've identified would occur. In addition, when we had ECG looks at Train's report, they didn't express any concern that the estimated savings were way out there. And as we've talked before, there is a guarantee, but there's a cost that comes with that guarantee.
Right.
And Scott, do you want to?
Yeah, that makes total sense, Meg. I think that, the energy savings that were in Train's estimate are pretty low hanging fruit, as you put it. It's lighting savings, it's building envelope savings. You would see an energy reduction by doing those, especially the lighting. That's the biggest piece.
Control too, Scott?
Yes. Yep.
I just want to reiterate my position. It kills me to say that we can't use Townsend floodproofing as our primary, but we originally worked very hard to try to come up with a grant scenario with that. And until that comes to fruition, we just can't afford right now. We looked at this several times. We just cannot afford to have that extra almost $1 million on the district's taxpayers' backs, because we know budgets are going to get even tighter in the next couple of years coming forward. And we have to be ultra conservative. Even if it looks like there's a positive gain right there, it's going to be a problem very shortly in the future. So I just think that we have to be conservative, and we have to let the grants work themselves out, and we have to hold our ground and just not put that on the taxpayers' backs. And it kills me to say it, but I think we have to do that.
And I don't have an issue with stepping away from doing the Townsend flood mitigations. I guess right now my biggest concern, because I think everybody's agreeable on the high school, middle school, and the EPC, My biggest concern right now is I know we're taking the 500,000 out of capital reserve, which showing us a $69,000 a year increase, if you will, or savings a year, versus not taking anything out of capital is only 26. My concern is not knowing what's going to happen with the state, what's not going to happen with our budget in the future. If we can show a savings of 26,000 a year and still have that $500,000 available to us for next year, not knowing what comes down the pike, I would personally feel a lot more comfortable with having that 500,000 that we have access to, if we need to use that to help offset future budgets.
I think that's in a dedicated account though, Kevin. If it's in a capital reserve project, I'm not sure if we can pull it out, and I don't believe it's transferable money, and Meg, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
It would have to be used for capital.
Right, so we
With all
wouldn't.
your 100, go ahead.
We wouldn't be able to use it as an operating expense to offset taxpayers' dollars. The only place you could use it is a capital project, unfortunately.
Right, but we're also talking about trying to do $100,000 capital projects every year for the next few years if possible too.
Which remember, that's once the first year we start that costs us $86,000. From there on, it'll be the cost share of that. So it's the initial shock that's going to get us on that train. And Meg said, when I asked that just a minute ago, she said that it was in the operational budget for this year, the first initial cost. And then from there on, it's really just funding our local cost share as it rolls in from the state side of things. That's assuming the state holds our rates and things like that, which is a big assumption right now.
I'm not positive if the capital reserve could be used for a capital outlay project. Christine, I don't know if you know that answer off the top of your head.
I do. It can, as long as it's a separate proposition and it's approved by the voters.
So, but like Graydon said, this year we're putting $100,000 in. And so next year we would get 86,000 back in aid that we would put towards the next one, and we'd have to contribute 14. I want to
Exactly
just
correct.
lay out some information on the timeline, and Scott and Christine, correct me if I'm wrong. What we have scheduled to happen next is for Scott to present at next week's board meeting to just start to inform the whole board on the project. We don't have to decide tonight or this month whether or not we're going to use the capital reserve or not use the capital reserve. We need to decide what we publicly want to start to talk about. And if we decide that we want to talk about the high school, middle school project and the EPC going forward, we can do that. We can add a caveat that if we get positive information from state ed and CWC, we may add the Townsend flood mitigation. And really the drop dead date for a final decision on that is September? Question mark?
Right. I think the seeker, and I'll defer to Scott on that, but the seeker would be the only concern if you did bring Townsend in. Scott, would different seeker be needed for the project at that point?
We're not disturbing over, we're not, the acreage I think is fine. We're still under the 10 acres. So I don't see that as being a big factor. I think we'd still be okay.
I would actually roll the dice with putting the Townsend into the original seeker, because I think it's minimal because you're working on the shell.
Well, we actually do have some line items for Townsend in this. If you went with the second option, the 7.7 million, there's some energy work there in the budget for that. There's lighting system replacements in Townsend, and then we also have in the budget to do those structural floor repairs that, remember, we talked about a few years ago.
Right.
So seeker Townsend would be part of the seeker anyway.
Okay. I like Kevin's idea that, if we need to be a little bit more conservative, is the balance possibly take 100,000 as a separate line for our small capital project this year, and then use 400,000 out of the capital reserve. That may also be an option that we may determine is our best path forward in September, potentially. So in other words, instead of budgeting for it in our operational expenses next year, you could use 100,000 of the capital reserve on a single line to be able to fund it out of that. And then if we have 400,000 left in the capital reserve, then put that towards the projects.
The problem with that would be Graydon, is that the budget that we have ready and that the board voted on to go to the public doesn't include that being funded out of the capital reserve.
Okay. All right,
So I'm not sure we could switch that at this point.
okay. I was just trying to think of ways to, you know, be a little even more conservative, that's all.
Mhm.
And so back to your schedule question, Meg, you will have to know whether or not you're including, or you'll have to know your final scope, the time when the board passes the resolution to call the vote. So at that point, you'll need to know your final scope.
And I don't have it in front of me, but that was September, correct?
It was no later than September 29th we had on the schedule.
Right.
So the key would be us getting our inquiry to state ed and getting a response from them between now and September 29th, or September, really.
Your inquiry for
As far as they're just sending them a letter to say, okay, that was how we left it in January when we talked to them, is that we were going to submit our legal opinion about how CWC should be treated. And so we need to get that to them so that they can then respond.
Right. So you do have the, a few months here to still work through that battle. And, what happens if you get to say August and it's a favorable proposition that they'll work with you on that. I guess you could still make the determination then that you want to include the Townsend work as part of the referendum, I would think, as long as we do all of that and we have that as part of our secret process, which would really start in the late summer, midsummer, I'd say, late July, early August. So gives us a few months anyways to fight that battle.
Graydon, where do we stand with CWC? Do you have any idea? Or Meg?
You're muted, Graydon.
I believe, John, that the ball is in our attorney's court currently. They're writing up the questions for SED so that they can have an official response of them. I believe is where that stands. Correct, Meg?
Now I'm muted. Yes, as far as I know.
Yeah, so I think it's on us right this second, John.
Okay. So it does look favorable or no?
Well, I think that what it really becomes is that this is a recommendation out of the local flood analysis that was put together for Walton as a high priority for a critical infrastructure. So from that standpoint, it is a very high priority for funding out of the CWC for that. I'm sure that they are willing to help us one way, shape, or form. The curveball was whether or not their funds could be looked at as a local match to help us on capital projects or not, or whether, because we originally proposed having them fund the whole entire thing with no SED money in it, and they are trying to see if they could use their money for a local cost share, so it wouldn't cost them the whole shot either.
Right.
And I think once we get to the end of that determination, if it's no from SED, then we ask for the whole entire thing again, and they say yes or no to it.
Mm-hmm. I'm asking that because that oil tank at Townsend School is going to become a bigger issue every month, every few months, every year.
Yeah, after seeing what we're working with at Breaky Motors, things like that, that tank not leaking right now needs to come out of the ground before you have an issue.
Yeah, because DEC, they're gonna, we're down to like 1,500 gallons of oil in it right now, so it would barely suck anything out. And their rules are, and they've let us kind of slide that, we need to use a certain amount of gallonage out of that each year, or we need to get it out of the ground. And I do not want to put oil through good operating boilers, through the burners when we're, things are going so well with gas, I just don't want to cross that bridge.
I understand your position on that for sure.
Well, I almost think we're better off at this point than not counting on the CWC fundings, and if we need to just pull that like we talked before and then let the chips fall where they are and then reapply to CWC, because I believe the last conversation with our attorneys was that they were working at it, but CWC had, or not CWC, I'm sorry, but SED had dug in pretty deep on it and really wasn't looking to grant that. So I guess how much more time do we lose on trying to make that battle when we're fighting uphill constantly? Or do we just, I think Graydon, you mentioned it before, and pull the towns in the street or towns in school, flood mitigation off and proceed with the other ones, and then go back to CWC and see what we can do there.
And if they choose to fund the whole entire thing, Kevin, we're in a different process anyway.
Right.
So, I mean, our worst case scenario is that if SED denies it and then CWC doesn't fund it, then we're left unprotected in Townsend the way we are currently, which nobody wants to see from an asset standpoint. But right now, I don't know how we have to be more conservative, and there's no way we can fund it.
I have a question. I wonder if we pull out the $100,000 tank and put that into the other project, the $7 million project. You know, we have $100,000 plus or minus allocated for that tank removal. Take it out of the Townsend flood mitigation, put it into the other. Then that way you at least address that tank issue.
That'd make me feel a lot better with that.
I think I agree with John on this, that tank is not an emergency right now. If it becomes an emergency, we don't have enough money any way, shape, or form to fund getting rid of it. So it's a pint now or a pound later.
Boy, if we add that to that project with only $100,000 banking on removing that tank, and we get into some serious contaminated soil, we could do that in a heartbeat.
Well, you do have project contingencies. You know, we do have a 10% contingency on the entire project in there per SED regs. So we do have some money to account for some of that. And we also have, you know, I think, you know, we would certainly want to look at that. And if we decide we wanted to have a little bit more protection for the soils, we could look at that number and say, okay, you know, we bump it up a little bit.
The other thing is, Kevin, we could ask the county solid waste facility what if we can get an agreement in place with them, what it would cost to take petroleum laced, potentially oil, you know, contaminated soils there. Because if they didn't have a major tipping fee on that for us, for the district, then it wouldn't be as cost prohibitive as you think, as long as we can haul the contaminated materials there. It's when we get into groundwater issues and pumping and filtering groundwater is where your prices go up. And if you have to ship out of county, then your prices go up. So maybe we could do a little bit of legwork there to see, you know, what kind of ground we're on with them, as to whether we can bank on their help if we need it.
If you add that in and run through all the numbers, the construction contingency incidentals and all of that, it would bump it from 7.077 up to 7.208. So a little over 100,000, it would bump it up.
And I think out of all the, I mean, that's an emergency, really. Having that thing in the ground every day is just worse for us. And the last thing I think we want to do is force John to burn fuel oil in a system that's working great on gas, and then really cause us more maintenance headaches than it's worth.
Yeah, and it will, and it does. And, you know, because probably they won't come around this year, maybe not even next spring, but DEC is going to be here. They just show up, you know, unannounced, and they start pulling rank.
So Graydon, is there a way to CWC have any grading that we can apply for to just have that tank removed and not flood mitigation?
When I presented that to CWC as part of the project, I got a little pushback from that, Kevin, but that's not a bad ask as a separate item. I think that would be valid for us to ask that, and they can either say yes or no to that right now, and that would help us to know whether or not they're going to fund that as a portion of the other project anyway. So I think maybe we'd get that across the table as an application to say, will you help fund this in part? we can do
Because
that.
even if they did 50% of that, I mean, I understand the 10% too, Scott, but what I'm looking at is if you have $100,000 mark for that, 10% is 10 grand. And then if every other part of this project hits a 10% overrun, something's going to come up short at the end of the day. And I don't want to go out to the taxpayers and say, this is what we're doing. This is the scope of our project. And then be like, ooh, we can't quite do all that now. I mean,
Well, yeah, but we're not going to hit 10% overruns on all the rest of the project. I mean, that's just not going to happen.
We got you recorded, Scott.
I know that, but I'm comfortable saying that. I'm comfortable saying that.
No, Kevin, I think
No.
if we approach CWC and we gave them a max request, so if we did hit contaminated soils or something like that, it's not on them to share the cost out with that. That may put them in a better light to say, okay, yeah, we don't mind paying $50,000, but if it costs you $150, you're still got the 100. You know, maybe we can word the request like that, where there's a absolute max to our request for them.
And likely that removal project would probably be around the $60,000 mark, but you always have to build in the extra 30 or 40 grand for the, in case you ran into contaminated soils and things like that.
Your closure report can run 30 grand. Ask Scott.
Mhm.
Graydon, do you have a contact at the county that we should have a conversation with? And what would be the process for making that request from CWC?
So I would talk to Sue McIntyre, and I don't mean to jump over anybody. I'm not trying to jump over anybody in any form up there, but I would ask Sue McIntyre because she's the head of DPW, and just make the request of if we run into soils, X amount of yards potentially, and we can ballpark that what the yardage would be, and say, would you be willing to waive the tipping fees on this for the district and use it for landfill top or something like that? Actually, that's going to be good gravel material. They may want to use it for the roads, but we could make that request of them and then get that in writing. The CWC part, I think they have a rolling application period. So we could turn in an application the same way we did with the Townsend, use the exact same application, basically the portion for the tank removal, and then just make a request for that's closer to their guidelines. So their guidelines, I think they're 75-25 is what they are for cost share. We asked for the 100 for the flood mitigation. I think that made a little bit of a sticking point because it was outside the rules a little bit. But if we just ask for a 50-50 or 75-25 and cap it, that application could go in like next week.
You say we like we did it, but I think you really helped us out with that last one. So I guess if there's forms you want filled out by the district, certainly just let me know what they are or point me in the right direction.
Yeah, I have no problem working with you on it directly and get that to fruition again as quick as possible. No problem.
And I could bring out a lot of the blueprints for the original tank install that would probably help us.
Oh, that would help a lot, John. If you could pull, if you actually could pull those, and if there's a point in time where I could just get together with you, Meg, or maybe we can do it electronically. We'll go through that same format we did last time and try to turn it around as quick as possible.
Okay, I'll pull those in the morning then.
Do I need a resolution or anything to do that, Larry? I think last time you just gave us a blessing to do it and we moved from there.
You're muted, Larry.
He said absolutely, I could tell.
I can read his lips.
I think you're fine.
Okay.
Muted. So I think the consensus I'm hearing is that we want to move forward with the middle school, high school, and the energy improvement measures and adding the tank. And that's basically the scope of the project that Scott would begin to present to the entire board next week.
That sounds reasonable to me. And then we can just hope and pray that we get movement from CWC and SED to an extent and be able to find that as a separate piece. That's what our hope would be.
I can make some calls tomorrow and see if there's anything we can do with the soil.
Why didn't I think of that myself,
Yeah.
Kevin? Thank you. I forgot you had that contact. Thank you. That would be great. I was going to coordinate that with Scott, but I think if you could make some inroads for us, that would be wonderful.
No promises.
No, but thank you in advance.
Scott, moving forward, one of my thoughts about the scope is maybe we want to not necessarily refer to it as an EPC anymore because we're not doing a separate contract, but they will be energy improvement measures kind of thing.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that as well, that I think it gets confusing when we call it an EPC going forward. So I think we just want to, typically you want to come up with some sort of phrasing for a project like this. And, whether it's, roofs, parking and energy enhancements or something, we've come up with a phrase for it, but that's what you want to refer to it in public and on documents and everything else.
The only other thing I had on the agenda was for an update for Scott, as far as where we are on the capital outlay project as we've started the ball rolling.
Before we move on, Meg, I'd just like to hit you with one question on this one here, or throw one at you, I should say. Back to the use of the 50,000 capital. Before we go to the board, I'm not looking to waste a lot of energy on people, but I don't know workload involved with doing this spread. Can we break that down under 50? Or do you think because we have it in the budget, or 500,000, we have to leave it at that?
So you're saying, could we look at a scenario of if we put 250,000 or 400,000 instead of the full 500,000? I think
Correct.
Christine could probably do that pretty easily. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she's nodding her head. So is there a particular number you'd like to see?
I don't know. You got any thoughts, Graydon? 250, 400? I'm just thinking if we had a window for the board could have options to look at.
Yeah, I would split it in half, Kevin, so then everybody can do the math in their heads.
That's
Okay.
And what is
Okay, so,
the final timeline for making a decision on whether or not we're going to use and how much we're going to use? That would be part of the budget vote, correct? Because they'd have to know how much they were voting on borrowing and how much was coming from not the budget vote, but the capital project vote. I have budget vote on the brain.
Yeah.
Okay.
exactly correct. Yep.
So hopefully, go ahead.
So when the Board of Education adopts the resolution calling the vote, that resolution will show exactly the maximum dollar amount the project can be, how much will come from capital reserve, the difference being borrowed, and then we'll describe the scope as well. And that'll be your final time to make any changes.
Meg, our balance in the capital budget right now is 500,000, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
If life today was as it was in the beginning of March, we would probably be looking at putting more in there in July, but a lot has changed since then.
Yep.
Okay, capital outlay project, the flooring in the music room and some ceiling works, Scott?
So that has been submitted to SED. And so that's gone through the preliminary review process, but now it has to be looked at by the architectural review side of it and engineering as well, because we have a little bit of ceiling work. So we're just waiting now. It's a waiting game. We will, after the budget vote is passed in June, we will have to send copies of the approved budget with board meeting minutes showing that the budget was approved, and then any information that you have, like a budget brochure that shows what the expenses were, they want a copy of that as well. So we'll have to send that in, but that'll take care of it as far as paperwork goes.
And do we have to wait till after the budget vote to go out to bid and SED approval? Do we need both of those things before we go out to bid?
You need both of those things, yes. Yep.
I think that's it, unless anybody has anything else.
I just have one last question for Scott. Scott, when we added in the oil tank, can you just confirm, you said the total would be 7,208,000?
Well, I bumped it to 7,209,000 because it was 7,208 and some change. Yeah, so I just bumped it up to 209. Yep.
Okay, perfect. So that's the amount that I'll move forward using for each of the different scenarios.
And I'll send to you and Meg a copy of that updated spreadsheet right after the meeting here, so you have that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
And
Miranda,
I don't, go ahead, Graydon.
Yeah, Miranda, did you get a chance to see the PDF of the parking lots and those drawings?
I did briefly, but not very, because it was on my phone. I didn't pull them up and
Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody's got that. And then just ahead, I wanted to make sure you're up to speed. If you have any questions on any of that stuff, bounce it off Kevin, myself, or anybody, just so that before the presentation, you know, if somebody approaches you, you got whatever you need for answers.
Okay, thank you.
And my thought is, Scott, I guess anybody chime in, what we're going to present to the board is not the various scenarios that we've been through and the decision making. Basically, we're presenting to them, here's what we have. This is our plan going forward. So
That's correct. That's my understanding.
okay, just making sure we're all on the same page.
So I was really going to go through the budget spreadsheet that we have that shows the different scope items, and then also talk about it graphically with the drawing. And I know you have the large board there, but of course we're not meeting, we'll be meeting like this. So I can bring up on the screen, I can bring up the drawing and bring up the budget as I'm speaking. So, because it looks like I have a share capability here to do that. So.
Corey also has the ability to put documents on board docs so the public and or the board can see them. So having the PDF there or any other things that you would maybe distribute if we were having a live meeting are things that Corey could add to that.
So I'll copy Corey on this revised budget, so she has a PDF of that. I believe, do you also already have the PDF of the drawing, or should I just put them together so you have everything right together? I can do that.
I have it, but one place would be good.
Okay, I'll do that.
What we're going with is that drawing that you sent to us, right, Meg?
Yes.
Okay, that's, yep.
So
Any
I
questions on that?
want to say this has been a process, but I really thank everybody for their diligence on it, because I'm very comfortable with the outcomes and what our options are for the district. So Christine, everybody, thank you for all your hard work. We know we've asked a lot of you, and a lot of times we haven't given you a lot of turnaround time to do that. Scott and your team, thank you. Tracy, what the transportation side of things and parking has been great. So we appreciate everybody. John, your work on the roofs. Larry, bringing it together, and Meg, always organizing us. So thank you. And Corey, keep us all informed as we go forward.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with everyone.
Yes,
Great to see it going to the board, for sure.
very positive.
All right, I didn't have anything else.
All right, then we're done.
I think we are.
It's
Okay,
record time, I think.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
have a good night.
All right, have a
Good
good
night.
night. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Safe travels.